Now, before we go into today's episode, I just want to give you guys a quick update. The Mythic guides are going to be coming out over the next 2 weeks or so. We need to jump back into the instance, just get some extra footage, just to polish up the guides as much as we possibly can. And as a result, because our progression is now finished, and all we need to do is just make those guides, as soon as they're done, we're going to be back with streaming from this point onwards, and laps around Dalaran are going to start kicking off again. Starting with this episode, and today we're going to be talking about the Emerald Nightmare race, and the instance in general, because it's been an interesting race. Well, it's been a very short race. 18 hours it took Exorcist to kill the entire instance, which is not only a new world first for them, it's the first time they've ever got world first in the race, which is fantastic. Many congratulations to them, but it's the first time the instance has been cleared that fucking quick.
Yeah,
the last time it was done that quick was something like Nax, and that doesn't really count.
Oh, well, like Nax 25 back in, that was terrible.
That just didn't count.
Yeah, there's never been an instance cleared this quickly. Well, not for a very long time, and it's definitely worth talking about, because there's a lot of people like shooting off things saying, oh, the instance is obviously terrible, the bosses are all easy, they've really mucked up the whole instance, it is terrible. And maybe part of that is true. I would say that there's many different factors to it that maybe not a lot of people are talking about. Yeah. So I thought we could explore some potential reasons as why this race has just been so quickly. And I think one of the main reasons, honestly, is the gear that guilds could get before going into the raids.
And that directly correlates with tuning.
Yeah, so, I suppose so.
In the past, whenever they do decide to tune Mythic, they've always, I guess this is the process, they look at heroics and how much gear players can get from heroics in a single week. They maybe calculate how many of the top end guilds are going to be doing split runs, or even in the top 1,000, how many guilds are going to be doing split runs. They calculate exactly how much gear they would gain from those split runs, and they tune Mythic around that. So you can still progress through Mythic and essentially get stuck at a boss where maybe you need some more gear, but by doing another heroic split in that Mythic week would usually cover it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's typically how it's been. At least that's how it was through Warlords for the very, very top end guilds. Whereas now, I guess tuning Mythic, they kind of have to make a decision. They can do it based on how much gear players would get in the heroic raids or the heroic split clears, or they can decide to tune the instance based on the heroic split clears, as well as the 20 hours a day of Mythic Plus, and all the different opportunities they have to get Titan Forged in those particular runs, the amount of artifact power they get in all those runs, the additional chances of getting a legendary that's actually decent in all those runs. And I think that is the reason why the instance was cleared so quickly by Exorcist, because they're a hardcore guild. They're going to do everything in their power to get the highest rank possible, and that means they are going to be doing Mythic Plus all day. And they're a special case because the majority of the other guilds that do go into Mythic content, so we're talking the top 1,000 here, or even the top 2,000 eventually, they're not doing that. So they're only doing the heroic clears, and at the end of the day, Blizzard are only going to tune the instance for the majority. They're not going to tune the instance for the top 20 or something, or the top 40 for that matter. So as a result, it appears the instance is a piece of cake and it's really shit and all this, and that's where all these arguments and all these comments are coming from, because it has been cleared that quick. But it's because these players started progression before Mythic even came out. Progression essentially started as soon as the Heroic Week started, because that's when you had access to Mythic Plus.
Well, you could even say it started as soon as the expansion launched.
Sure, yeah. Especially with the whole Titan Forge system. I mean, of course, it did cap at 850, and they actually nerfed Mythic Plus before it even came out, because they obviously saw that it was going to be
crazy,
not necessarily an issue, but it would be a huge loot avenue, you know, there's basically loot being thrown down your face. But I guess that's the issue that they've created for themselves, and if this continues out for Nighthold, I don't know whether it's a bad thing or not. I mean, it makes it a lot better for these Mythic guilds, because they don't have to progress for months and months and months, or even weeks or whatever. They can do it really, really quickly. But in a way, it kind of takes a lot away from the race.
Yeah, I would say that.
Although, wait, before you do say, to continue on that point, it might not actually take away from the race. If anything, it might make the race more competitive, because if a player makes even the smallest mistake on a boss and you do end up wiping, that 10-minute gap that you've just lost might actually make you lose world first.
I guess you could. It would make a new meta. It would. It would be a new race meta going on. But I honestly feel that like the length of this race and the length of even our progression as a guild, it felt very, very short.
Yeah,
and we spent, like, either me and you, we spent a long time preparing all of our characters. We spent the last 5 weeks just sitting on this game all day, every day, just getting as strong as we possibly could to go and do something that only lasts for, like, 4 days for us or something? Like, 1 day for some of these big guilds? It feels quite anticlimactic.
Sure.
I think the progression rating is, at least for me, one of my favorite parts of this game. Learning, like, pretty much just each boss is a puzzle, and you just got to work out what each of the pieces do, and then you got to try and, like, counter it in some way. And if it's all, like, done and dusted, it's like, oh, okay, see you in, like, 5 months or whenever the next, like, tier comes out, you know?
16 months if you're
Well,
if you're
16 months in Hellfire Citadel, whatever. Yeah, exactly. So that's a little bit of a shame. I think that I think that's maybe a little bit too short.
I agree.
In this new stuff. But yeah, I must agree with you that the disparity between someone who is going to be farming Mythic Plus all day, every day, to someone who maybe can do like a couple a day, is going to be huge, because not only are they going to be able to generate more gear, which of course gives them higher chances of gaining Titan Forge pieces, which can go really, really high, but also it's going to give them more opportunities to get legendaries. And of course, if they're getting more opportunities to get legendaries, then it's more likely that they'll get the right legendary that they need. The strongest legendary.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly spamming out those legendary chances, you're likely to have your guild in a really solid position when going into the raid. And that's pretty much it with the gear. I don't think we've ever been as strong going into a first tier of an expansion ever, in terms of the gear that we have.
I mean, half the time the
gear
item
that
did
you
drop.
could get.
It was barely an upgrade. Typically, when you go into a raid, I mean, at least in Warlords, when you're first going into Mythics, when a boss died, every single piece of loot was used, even if it was loot that just had shit stats.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partially down to how the classes are right now, because quite a lot of the classes, the secondary stats are almost more important, or in some cases are more important than the primary stat.
Yeah.
So just item level alone isn't good enough. It has to be the right stat. I mean, of course, that's the situation for Fire Mages. They just need crit, and that's pretty much it. Shadow Priest, I know they really want a lot of haste, and Shadow Priest, I think, is a completely different subject that we need to talk about anyway. I think that's also quite important of why this tier was done so quickly.
And even with MM Hunters, Mastery's better than Agility for MM, so it's crazy at the moment in terms of how strong secondary stats are. And normally that wouldn't be a massive issue, because you'll go, oh, okay, I'll just grab in, the Mastery pieces that I can get. But with how crafted gear works as well, where you can kit out your entire character with 850 gear, which is pretty goddamn good. That's not as good as heroic gear, but that's kind of equivalent to what you'll be getting from Mythic Plus's first week. And if some of those can double roll into a single stat, so say as a hunter I for some reason did want double mastery, then I could, and then I'll go in with like this ridiculous item, or with a mage going in there with double crit stuff. That is huge.
And the itemization on the raid gear, it's good for some pieces, but for the majority of pieces, it's shit.
Yeah.
And it's not the right stats.
So a lot of classes like mages and shadow priests are going in there like best in slot, kind of.
Yeah.
Because of like just flat out, if there's no good chests in there for like fire mages or whatever, because no chest has crit, then maybe, I'm not 100% sure, this is just an example, maybe that crafted crit chest that you have is just going to be like ridiculous just because how much crit is worth to that class. So yeah, that also kind of like made a little storm going on, because those characters were just going in there so strong if they were prepared with crafted gear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was maybe, I don't know if that's necessarily a fuck up, that's just how the class is, but of course they made it so you could have as many crafted pieces as you wanted. You could have your entire kit minus your trinkets crafted gear.
And I think generally speaking,
I don't think that's a bad idea. No.
I actually like that. It just so happened that some classes really benefited from it. I would say that the majority of players just use that system to fill in the bits of gear that they don't have. Say, oh, I'm still sitting on an 820 ring and just no rings are dropping for me. Then sod it, I'll just go get a crafted one and it'll be really good. At least until I go into the heroic grades or into a higher level Mythic Plus. So I think that system's really good, but it was exploited by a couple of these classes just because of how good secondary stats are. And talking of Shadow Priest generally, I think Shadow Priest single-handedly contributed to this tier being easier because of Surrender to Madness.
Well, I think Surrender to Madness just played out so well on some of the Mythic encounters that were considered the harder ones.
Yeah.
Such as Il'gynoth, if you can get your Surrender to Madness stacks going before you go inside the eye and you do the one burst nuke phase, which pretty much, I think the majority of guilds have done that have killed it. I think 60 guilds have killed it now, something like that. I'm almost certain at least 90% of them just one phased it. And that was using classes with massive cooldowns, such as Shadow Priest, such as your Fire Mages. Basically, any classes were burst. I mean, even your healers were using, like, DPS pots and stuff. But Shadow Priest, if you could go in there with Surrender Madness already up and already stacked, and you go inside there, you're doing double the amount of damage of a fucking Fire Mage.
Well, you're kind of doing 10 mil more damage. I think roughly people do around 24 to 25 mil in there, and then Shadow Priests are, like, on 32, 33, 34 million within a 50-second gap. So it's kind of like, Shadow Priests in some of these fights are absolutely crazy good.
Yeah, and of course on Xavius, When you get the dream, you can use fucking Surrender to Madness twice in a single encounter.
Yeah, and the thing is with Surrender to Madness, not to like completely shit on it at all, because I think it's a really cool way of playing the game, because it's to do with, it's a very high risk, but you can have an exceptionally good reward if you play really well.
And Surrender to Madness is, I mean, if you're on a target dummy, it's relatively easy to keep up to get to 100 stacks and to really start pulling off the damage, because let's face it, it does a lot of damage, but its main source of damage is in those last 10 seconds, 5 seconds. That's when the damage is really fucking insane. And to get to that mark on an encounter where you have to run around, where you have to dodge things, where sometimes you're not going to be staring at your bars and doing a perfect rotation, it's hard to get to that.
I can't do it.
So if you do, neither could I on my priest in the heroic splits. But if you do manage to get to that point, it's cool that you're rewarded for it. It's a very interesting and unique mechanic for Shadow Priest, and I hope that they don't really do much with it.
But the thing is that it rewards you far too much.
But if you are really good for it, you do stick out in comparison to the other DPS.
It might be the highest skill cap in the game, maybe, in terms of being able to do that crazy stuff at the end. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but let's just say it is. If that's the highest skill cap, but it's just doing far too much damage, you shouldn't be able to burst like millions and millions and millions more than other like good classes. I'm not talking about the classes that they've mucked up on. I mean like a normal solid class. You shouldn't be outranking them by that much. Just from Surrender to Madness. And as you said, Surrender to Madness was just so good in this instance, and even after the nerfs it was doing so much damage that I honestly think that Shadow Priest has just done quite a lot of damage in terms of the like race of this instance. Like you can just absolutely annihilate it for a good Shadow Priest.
I'm pretty sure that they're going to make Surrender to Madness a 3-minute cooldown, and it's going to work very similar to how it does now, except it doesn't kill you at the end. And they'll just nerf the amount of damage it deals.
Well, just from nerf
They have to do something with it, right? I mean, or they have to buff the line that it's on, because the other abilities are barely a I think it's a Mind Spike is a damage decrease.
I think they buffed it recently, but beforehand it at least was a damage decrease.
So
I don't know anymore.
That line just sucks, apart from Surrender to Madness.
Yeah, and it's fortunate for Shadow Priest that it worked this instance, because if it didn't work this instance, there wouldn't be any Shadow Priests really in the group. I mean, they're
okay. I mean, maybe not in the top end guilds, but I think, Shadow Priests, when they're not using Surrender to Madness and they're just doing normal damage, they're sort of middle pack.
Yeah, they're all right. Okay, they are all right. Maybe I was a little harsh in saying that they wouldn't be used. But Surrender to Madness just makes them stand out. And because of that, it kind of indirectly nerfed bosses.
And I don't think Blizzard really expected them to be as strong as they were, maybe, or as used as much as they are, because they were used on every single boss. I mean, it made enrage timers on certain encounters that were probably supposed to be more difficult, such as Ursoc, such as Evil Tree being able to one-phase it. I don't think they were expecting guilds to do that in the very first week.
Yeah, that's crazy. That you're able to skip over half the encounter just because of damage.
And maybe Sonaris to a lesser extent as well, but probably not as much of a big deal as, of course, the other ones. So, Surrender to Madness, broken as shit. I think they underestimated it, even after the nerfs.
So although we could say, Shadow Priest, they might be really overpowered and everyone's got a ton of gear going into the instance and it was hard to like kind of scale it. Do you scale it for the best or do you scale it for the middle pack? That might have been more difficult, and that's why we kind of end up where we are. We can't completely take the blame away from some of the bosses, because some of the bosses in this instance weren't very good.
Okay, so Ursoc, I think the enrage timer could have been way tighter.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, maybe this is a bit of a bad example because our guild was farming Mythic Plus a lot.
Yeah.
And we did have 3 Shadow Priests when we did go to Ursoc, and the comp that we went with was just massively high single target damage. We were using like 4 mages, we're using 2 arms warriors. We basically just went with one of the best comps you could for that encounter, apart from maybe having 15 Shadow Priests. But once you get that boss to like past 50%, and you sort of understand what you need to do at what point and how you need to do your cooldowns towards the end of the encounter, it was literally, do you have enough DPS? And it didn't feel anything as tight as, say, Butcher in Highmall.
Well, thank God.
Thank God, because that fight was absolutely horrible. And typically, fights where it's like you need to have the perfect pull, perfect RNG in order to kill it, is fucking shit anyway. No one likes progressing those bosses, especially when they have as little mechanics as Butcher, and arguably as little mechanics as Ursoc.
Yeah, I think Ursoc, like, although he was supposed to be, like, it felt like he was supposed to be like a target dummy fight, where it was going to be that really hard DPS check on like a patchwork style fight. It honestly didn't feel like that. It was.
Well, I mean, we killed him on within 5 pulls or something, maybe even 6 pulls, and as soon as we got him past that 50% mark, this is what I meant to say earlier, once you get him past the 50% mark, we pretty much killed him.
Yeah, because you just like, oh, okay, everything lines up, you just nuke him down. Yeah, it was a bit weird. It's not like a terrible fight in any way.
No.
It was just kind of, it was just there, it was just a fight. It was a cool one, but it wasn't like anything outstanding. There was also a couple of the earlier bosses. Of course, they're designed to be, early bosses. And early bosses, even in Mythic, they're not too difficult to deal with. Normally, if you can kill the last boss on Heroic, you can kill the first boss on Mythic without too many difficulties.
I actually wanted to say that I think Nythendra on Mythic is one of the hardest first bosses in Mythic we've seen for a very long time.
It's a lot of personal responsibility.
I think
it's the first boss.
much harder than most Mythic bosses. I think it actually needs to be nerfed.
Really?
Yeah, or fixed, depending on which way you want to look at it. The fact that when the MC people break, they still have dots on them and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's kind of bullshit.
Yeah, the ignites
and
from our fire mages.
And at certain points, when you do break the MC, it does come in very close after a rot. So if you have loads of people MC'd, or if your MC breaking is a little bit slow, or someone stood outside the group, as soon as they break, they can be instantly rotted, or be on targets that already have rot. And I think that maybe the timing on that could be improved slightly. I've heard a lot of guilds complain. That never happened with us, because it just didn't. But I have heard complaints of that happening with other guilds. So maybe that could be changed. But yeah, I think Nythendra is a bit brutal for a first Mythic boss.
I do agree with you that Nythendra can be... I would say that she's a relatively brutal first boss, but still she is a first boss. So she is still quite easily killed. And then people move on to Renferal. And Renferal, as long as you progress it platform by platform, the damage requirement isn't super high.
No,
it's just kind
of
understanding how the fight plays out and just countering the new mechanics. So she's not particularly difficult either once you got the hang of it. You've already talked about Ursoc. Dragons is a bit weird because it's,
Dragons is literally, can you do the heroic mechanics and can you go in the portals?
Yeah, the main new mechanic is that you got ads in the portals.
In the
around
portals,
the
you send
of
a
the
group of 4 DPS, 1 healer, you kill the ad, you come back out. That's it.
Yeah, there's not actually any new mechanics. It's just that you're fighting all 4
Your
dragons
strategy's
at once.
slightly different because you have like a floating healer. You go with 5 healers so you can always have one in the portal without the side sort of flopping.
Yeah.
Although I've seen a lot of guilds 4 heal it, so I guess you can do that. But yeah, I think that's just... It's simple, really.
Yeah, there's no new mechanics in that fight. It's just, dealing with a lot of them all at once.
Yeah.
So once again, that's not really that much of a puzzle to solve. So all of these so far, they're relatively easy to get through. They're not like super, super difficult.
There's no cock block, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's just something that you got to learn about raid awareness. It's just general basic stuff, and you're not dealing with a brand new mechanic that you have no idea how it works.
And then the first block that does come along is pretty much, I'd say, Evil Tree.
Yeah, oh god, Evil Tree is nothing to be messed with.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
guy is vicious.
Getting into the first tumor phase isn't particularly difficult. There's a couple of strategies you need to use. Basically, when the blobs explode, they do AoE damage to your entire group, so the idea is you can't blow loads of blobs up all at the same time. You need to progressively blow them up over the course of the fight at set intervals, and then you need to transition perfectly into the eye with no ads up. And then what most guilds are doing is that they're just nuking the eye and killing it in that one single phase. I believe Method actually didn't do that, and they decided to keep progressing the fight instead.
Yeah.
So full respect to them, because the second half of the encounter is actually much harder than the first. Mm-hmm. But I think almost every guild that's progressing it right now is literally trying to get a one-phase burst.
Yeah.
And we spoke about this already in the video. The fact that you can even do that in this first Mythic week is insane. Surely the encounter isn't designed to be defeated that way.
Not on first week.
Not on first week. Surely later on when you've got more gear, but no way you should be able to do it this early. Surely. Otherwise, why they even designed later parts of the fight? They should just end it there and just everyone fucking dies.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's really good that you are able to do it, but not this early. I think it's a really nice way of making it so bosses, like when you're on farm, you can kill them easier. That's like a nice little thing that you could put into an encounter, maybe as an afterthought. But the fact, like, you could literally fix that by removing 10 seconds of your inside time the first time you're in there. If they remove 10 seconds from it, if they did at least, of course they wouldn't do that now because that's just really out of order to people that are progressing on it. But if they did do that in the past, I think that a lot of guilds will still be stuck on it because that second phase, of course, we didn't do it. But
because we skipped it.
Yeah, exactly. But
Shadow Priest.
Yeah, but watching like videos of other people doing that second phase, I'm like, no, thank you. Like, no way in hell do I want to be like subjected to that. So yeah, props to people who actually managed to do it. But yeah, I'm kind of glad that you can one phase it, even though it does feel a little bit cheap.
And then the boss afterwards, of course, Cenarius. I think this is where the race. I think Cenarius single-handedly is where the race ended. If you kill Cenarius, you'll see almost every single guild afterwards immediately goes off and kills Xavius. I mean, at this point, I don't know if I get wild progress up. So yeah, at this point, there is 2 guilds that have killed Cenarius and are now progressing on Xavius. By the time we finish this audio and have made this video and released it, there's probably going to be no guilds that are working on Xavius, unless another guild so happens to kill Cenarius. But that's how quick it is.
Before we jump straight into Xavius, because I have a lot to say about that fight, it's Very disappointing. Let's talk about Scenarios. Scenarios, I thought, was a very good boss in terms of its difficulty. It was a difficult fight.
It was the first boss where it felt like you actually needed to progress like you would with hard Mythic bosses.
Yeah.
Like your Manaroths, like your Zul'Haraks, like your Tyrant Velharis, that sort of thing. It felt difficult.
Yeah.
And no other boss in there had felt like that yet, apart from Evil Tree to a certain degree, but then again, it felt cheesy as fuck because you could one-phase it.
Yeah, exactly. So the main difference on Scenarios is that each time a new set of ads spawn, the ad that you freed last time would then turn evil. So each time you have to deal with 3 of them, and it just made it so your choices of ad that you, like, spawned was, like, much more deep, because you had, like, much more, like, consequences by picking each different type of ad. And of course, each of the ads did have slight differences, like when you killed the wisps, they did damage to the entire group, or the tree ad would stomp multiple times in a row and deal extra damage to you and stuff like that. And this did make the fight very, very difficult. And on top of that, we have the brambles to deal with, and comparing the brambles to all the other mechanics in the fight, I would still say the brambles are the most irritating thing in this entire fight. Even in the entire instance, I despise the brambles, man.
I agree.
I do get it that they're trying to make like an untrackable mechanic to see. It seems like a bit of an experiment somewhat to see how guilds will react to it and everything like that. But just the brambles are so irritating because when they land, it's kind of not clear exactly which direction that they're running into because they're so like slow and chunky in their movement. And the fact that they're so important who it's going towards because it makes such a difference in terms of positioning in the encounter, and then they randomly switch and fixate on someone else, but you're normally having to be grouped up, so you have to spread out and stuff. Oh, I could probably ramble on all day about these brambles. They're so irritating.
Fucking hell.
But yeah,
you're the one that got caught by them on progression, not me.
Yeah, actually, that's very, very true. But I was a hunter, so I could det it and then die afterwards. So yeah. But either way, that fight was all to do with damage and healing requirement. There was actually a cheese strat for this fight as well,
which we were executing as well. This is the whole strategy where you have all the dragons on the corner of the room the entire fight. You never kill them. Everyone's outside the breath range, and you just have a single tank and a single healer there. All the way up until the last phase, you send another healer over there, and then they just hopefully don't die.
Yeah.
Which makes the fight, I guess, it doesn't necessarily make the fight that much easier, in my opinion. It just makes it quicker. And as a result, you don't have to deal with the 5th wave of ads or the 6th wave of ads. You can just go straight into the last phase and just hope those people in the corner don't die.
It kind of makes the fight maybe easier for the majority of the group, and then it makes it much harder for 3 people. The tank and the 2 healers have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And considering there's already quite a lot going on in the encounter with trying to organize the brambles, which I'm not going to talk about anymore, trying to organize everything, you know, it makes it so they can focus on those mechanics more. And it generally makes things a little bit more clean, even though you have half the room to deal with. Just not having to deal with the pulsing AoE damage of the dragons and not having to deal with the breath at the same time as cutting a route, it can really help out. So we decided to use that strat. It did work out in the end. But once again, it's another boss with like a sort of, I'm not sure if it is unintended, but it kind of feels maybe a little bit of a cheesy strat.
Yeah, it feels like maybe if ads are alive in the last phase, they should do like triple damage or something.
Yeah,
that would be
so.
one way of just instantly fixing the issue of like cheesing them by tanking them outside the room. And then that way that also sort of encourages you to make a clean transition as well.
Yeah, but of course, not every guild did it. I think Method,
I think Method again did it legit.
Yeah, they killed the dragons off. Yeah. Big props to them again for actually doing the fights how they're supposed to be done by the looks of it. But it's still a very, very difficult encounter. And then, of course, once you kill Scenarios, the penultimate boss, you get to go and fight the hardest boss that's ever been released in the game, Xavius.
Yeah, so Xavius was the biggest flop.
Yeah.
So I personally think that, well, I think it's a general consensus really for everyone that's killed him. He's just a shit boss. There's no other way of explaining it. He's just a terrible boss, and Blizzard have done a shit job of changing this boss going into Mythic. The only things that feel different is Phase 1, and Phase 2 very, very slightly. So in Phase 1, instead of half the raid being put to sleep, instead 5 beams spawn on the outside of the room, and you get to choose who goes into the dream state, which in a way you could kind of look at a buff because you can just send your Shadow Priest in it. They can use fucking Surrender to Madness twice and have a tank going one and, you know, your healer going the other so they can keep their corruption low. And the only other change in Phase 1 really is that the little lads that spawn, when they go to their target, they explode and do AoE damage around that target, which also gives everyone else corruption. But it doesn't change the strategy. You still put on the dream players. You just need to make sure that everyone else gets the fuck away.
Yeah.
And that is Phase 1. Everything else remains the same, except you have 2 ads rather than 1. big ad that is.
Yeah, it's just a very Dragon Soul style encounter where there might be unique mechanics like the Meteor and the Bonds of Terror, but they're all countered by the same way. Which
The Bonds of Terror isn't even unique. We've seen that shit on everything.
Yeah, but you know,
we've seen that. The first time we saw that was Blood Queen. Blood Queen Lanethel. That was in ICC. That's fucking unique, isn't it?
Well, not unique mechanics, but you know what I mean? There's lots of these mechanics to deal with, but you deal with them in the exact same way, which is just stacking up under the boss.
Yeah.
And that isn't fun. That's not fun to do, and especially on a last boss. Okay, imagine you're fighting Archimond or Blackhand. Blackhand Phase 2, actually. Imagine if Blackhand Phase 2, instead of having a group of people going up on the balconies, a group of people kiting ads, a group of people making sure that the mortar doesn't go in the right place, making sure you soak all the fire that lands from the ceiling in Phase 1, whilst doing very precise movement of the boss around the room, assuming you didn't use the cheese strat. Imagine instead you stacked up under the boss and nuked him.
Yeah.
That is what happened to this fight.
Yeah, that is Xavius. That is literally Xavius.
It honestly feels like they designed Phase 1 and made a couple of changes, like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool, and then like it was time to go to lunch, and then they forgot that they had to make Xavius on Mythic. It honestly does feel like that. It feels like they've like forgotten or something, and it's such a disappointing last boss. Just to give people an idea, it took Exorcist around 12 hours to kill Cenarius. It then took them under 3 hours to kill Xavius the first time. Yeah. And you got to remember, this is after about 15 hours of raiding. So these guys,
they're going to be out their fucking head.
Yeah, they're probably very tired.
Fuck.
And they still managed to kill it because they had no idea what was going on. When we went in there, we knew roughly what was going on. And we managed to kill it pretty quickly. But those guys, you know, they just went in and just not one shot it, killed it within 3 hours. Yeah. Like, no end boss should be able to be killed within 3 hours. End bosses generally, they take at least, I think Margok took like 3 days after like a major kill before that. So, like, and that's, Highmore is probably quite comparable to this instance because it's like the same size and the same point in an expansion. So the fact that you could kill the last boss that quickly just shows that they really fucked up the last boss.
It's just even if you can kill it really quickly, at least make it a good fight.
Yeah.
And it's not a good fight.
No.
I mean, Xavius on Heroic, in my opinion, is not a good fight.
It's okay.
It's okay, sure, but its placement in the instance is shit. If they made it the first encounter and it was like that, I wouldn't be that bothered about it. It'd be like, oh, that was quite a cool fight, whatever, let's move on to the next boss that's slightly more interesting. With this, you just end on it.
Yeah.
This is the last boss, this is the last thing you get to see, and it's anticlimactic as shit. It's just a shit boss.
No, I completely agree with you.
Where Phase 2 and 3, you just stack under the boss.
Mm.
And the thing is, they could have made, I mean, they could, if they really wanted to be really lazy, and they decided that they wanted to make it difficult, they could have just made it so the damage requirement was really high. But they didn't even bother doing that. They just made it really easy and just fucking boring. It was just heroic.
Yeah.
It was literally just heroic.
And
I have no idea what the thought process was behind that.
I think it was honestly a mistake. I think they
Do you reckon they actually had a really good Xavius ready, but they forgot to put him in the server files?
Oh, it's not in the patch? Oh, no one will get to it this week. Don't worry. We'll put it in next week.
Oh, that might have actually happened.
Oh, what? And then they woke up and Exorcist has killed it. No, that was intended. That's the intended strat.
Did you like the boss?
So yeah, honestly, after you kill Cenarius, Xavius feels like a victory lap. You just, run around cheering because you know you killed it. Like, our nerd screams on Cenarius were pretty intense. When we got to Xavius, it was just like, woo.
Yeah.
Good job, gang.
Everyone was like, I think people on the kill were like halfway like, oh, does anyone want to go do Mythic Plus after this guy dies?
Exactly.
It's like, it's not serious at all.
So that's, I think, generally all of these things taken together kind of made a perfect storm to why this instance was killed so quickly. Not only have we got so many new loot avenues, which made it so the top end guilds had a ton more gear, maybe more so than they would have an advantage over the middle section of Mythic Raiders. And not only were some of the classes maybe a little bit too strong, such as Shadow Priests, if they're played exceptionally well, but quite a few of the bosses, the earlier bosses, that's fine that they're relatively easy. But the middle bosses, Il'gynoth being able to be one-shot in Phase 1, that made it so a lot of guilds killed it earlier than maybe they should have. Cenarius, I'm not convinced that the Dragon strat made it so a lot of guilds killed it beforehand. Maybe it did, but I wouldn't...
I think it maybe saved, progression time by maybe, 20, 30 pulls. It basically means you didn't have to progress the 5th or the 6th wave, but you added progression to Phase 3, because it made Phase 3 harder because you had 4 fucking dragons out, or Phase 2 even, because you had 4 fucking dragons out.
Yeah, so I'm not convinced that Cenarius' cheese strat is properly a cheese strat, but then of course, the hardest thing in the entire instance, which is supposed to be Xavius, turned out to be a really big letdown. So if all of those things put together made it so Exhausters could kill it in 18
that's
hours.
what happens. If that's the perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly.
You do all those things, and the instance will be cleared on the first day by players that are fucking good at the game and spend a lot of time playing.
Yeah, and of course we might be saying, oh, of course, like Mythic Plus giving everyone loads of loot. Generally speaking, Mythic Plus is a really, really good system.
Oh yeah, no,
and I think the pros outweigh the cons by
Definitely,
so much. So it's not like, oh, we should change Mythic Plus.
But what they
stuff.
can do, looking at Nighthold, is that we were talking about how they scale Mythic. I think they can continue to scale Mythic like they always have, but just cap Titanforge on those first heroic weeks. Make it so you can't fucking get Mythic quality loot before Mythics are even open. Make it so people can target legendaries that are actually good for them rather than the fucking neck that puts an absorb shield on you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the thing is, they might not need to do big sweeping changes to the game to make it so that Nighthold is actually difficult. Well, I say that as if this was super easy. To make it so Nighthold is way more challenging for Mythic guilds.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, make it so that, I mean, of course, the 3 extra bosses in itself will add time.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is that allows the instance to maybe be scaled a little bit better, because not only are there more bosses, which means you can kind of scale up the difficulty curve, like you can have like 3 easy bosses, 4 or 5 middle bosses with a Gorfin slapdash in the middle, which makes it really difficult. And then you got like maybe 3 or 4 end bosses that are really, really hard. Not only have you got that, but the thing is we're going to be going in there geared. We're going to be like a lot of people that are going to be going into Mythic, they're going to be going in there with maybe, I don't know, 885, 890 gear on all of their characters ready to go into that. And then they're going to do Heroic Week, get a little bit of things. So basically Blizzard will know, like, everyone will be closer in item level in comparison to how this was. So I don't think that the items that people are going to be getting is going to be a huge deal going into the next tier in terms of how difficult it needs to be scaled. Also, with the way that class balancing works, at the beginning of expansion, sometimes it is a little bit funky, such as how Shadow Priests are a little bit at the moment.
And to be fair, they completely revamped every single class.
Yeah, so I'm surprised how balanced it actually is, if I'm honest.
Yeah, true.
So, of course, as it goes on and there are changes made to the game, like, balancing isn't like math, it's more of like an art, I've heard it being described as. They're going to make mistakes, so I'm sure they'll make it so when we get to 7.1, classes are maybe a little bit more closer together, and crazy outliers like Surrender to Madness in certain situations played by very good players won't be as overpowered as it is now. So generally speaking, I think that this just so happened everything kind of went bad for this little perfect storm. If it is like bad, it's a Mythic race. It affects pretty much no one. It is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not like everyone who is raiding now, it's a lesser experience because someone killed it like quicker.
I mean,
or
and
whatever.
at the end of the day, it's subjective. If you like the instance, you like it. If you don't, then you don't. I mean, it's entirely your opinion. But it does seem that the general consensus surrounding the instance is that it's a good instance.
Yeah.
Up to Xavius.
Mm-hmm.
And then Xavius is just a pile of shit. And we're talking Mythic here.
Yeah.
It's just a pile of shit. And the fact that the race was done so quick doesn't really show good signs of how difficult the content is. So I think for Nighthold, they do need to make improvements, try and make it so the content is still difficult for those people that are playing all day without fucking over the people that aren't playing all day. And they can simply do that just by, like I've already said, capping the Titanforge, making legendaries targetable, stuff like that. I mean, there's so many different ways they can do it. And of course, making it so, like you said, the thing of the classes, make it so certain ones don't stand out. But I'm not concerned. I'm not dissatisfied with Emerald Nightmare. I did enjoy it. It's just
so did
I would have liked to have enjoyed it for a longer period of time.
Yeah, especially when you put like 5 weeks worth of effort in. 100%.
I've been fucking busting our nut.
Yeah, it's
trying to get all these characters ready and everything like that, and then you go in there and
it did feel
you just one shot. It's just like, what?
Yeah, it was a little bit too quick. But the thing is that once again, a lot of these players are playing for a hell of a lot of time, and the thing is, I would say that we've got a hell of a lot of top end guilds suddenly popped up. Yeah. Like, a lot of people have suddenly, made new guilds, and there's some really, like, it's nice to see the raiding scene.
It's exciting to see that the raiding scene is still alive, yes.
Yeah, it's
very
a
much
lot of people
alive.
Playing. And, of course, there's still a lot of people progressing. These bosses are still difficult, and there are cheese strats in there somewhere. But, like, it's just, the difference between Cenarius and Xavius is just, it's just crazy. So, once you kill Cenarius, you might as well pat yourself on the back because you've just cleared the content.
Yeah.
And you'll be pretty happy.
But that's all we got time for, I guess. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Just to update you guys again, the Mythic Guide's coming out over the next 2 weeks, if not sooner. The stream is back online. We were actually supposed to stream today, but that went to shit.
Yeah, UK net is
England
shit.
for you, all fucking terrible. Laps is now back on a frequent basis. We're going to be doing it every single week if we can. And of course, a massive shout out to our guys on Patreon. There's so many of you signed up over the past few weeks since we released our Heroic Guide, so thank you so much for joining the team. and we shall see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.